All right, I'm gonna. I'm turning this around. And then you'll start the slideshow. Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And we've got a good group of around 30 people here at Red Bluff Park, and I don't even know how many we have online, but I think it's equivalent or how much?
43.
43, 44. So it's a wonderful gathering that we're here today to celebrate the memory of Paul. His legacy continues in many ways. It's an honor to welcome you to this celebration of his life. He would be so happy to know that we're celebrating his life here at Red Bluff Park. It's a place he loved so much. I think he would also be very honored that it's a hybrid event, that his friends from around the world, and I'm sure there's people from Europe and South America and Asia and different places all on this call today. So I think he would love that because he was always about community and bringing people together. I'd like to welcome the family of Paul in particular. We got Paul, I don't think on Zoom you'll be able to see them, but we've got Scott, and later some of the family will make some remarks, but Scott Tooby is Paul's son, and his wife Sayuri are here, and their children, Leo and Kai. We've got Sayuri's parents, Nicole and Yuka. No, Yuka and Dan, and Nicole's and Sayuri's sister, she's here, and Paul's brothers, Frank and Norton's wife, Peggy. So we welcome the whole family, and we're so glad you came in person. We're going to begin the ceremony by us sharing a slideshow. I have to remember not to look at that screen, otherwise we're going to be sharing a slideshow with photographs that many of you have sent, and we combined them into a slideshow of Paul's life, and accompanied by some piano music that my husband Lauren composed especially for Paul. And he performed it on April 4th at a concert in Walnut Creek, and we decided it worked well with the slideshow. So we'll start with that. After that, we're going to conduct 2 ceremonies, and then we'll hear from family and friends here in Red Bluff, followed by remarks from those that are with us virtually on Zoom. We welcome your memories and your recollections, your reminiscences shared today, either as part of the structured remarks or afterwards. We're going to be having food and a chance for informal visiting and continue to celebrate. So either way, each of you is part of Paul's life story in some way or other. So thank you. And before we open the floor for comments from friends and family, I will offer an opening tribute to Paul. I've known him personally for 50 years, and I hope that, my words can help frame what's going to happen the rest of the ceremony. Due to the large number of people both here and on Zoom, which I guess adds up to about 70 or 80 altogether, we ask if you can keep your comments to a couple of minutes. That would be appreciated if possible. And then I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping things. We'd like you to silence your phones if you haven't already. And if you need to use the restroom, we have portable restroom outside, and we're asking not to use the one in the building during the ceremonies, if possible. So just feel free to, if you need to get up and move around, you can go out this door or go out that door. We expect this to last a little over an hour and 15 minutes the most. So hopefully you'll understand, and that'll work out. But it's just a guideline, so feel free. So now we want to begin with a slideshow. I'm going to ask Ken if he can start it, and I hope everyone can hear it. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone who's contributed photos, and thank you, Lauren, for the beautiful music. We're going to go on now to a ceremony. It's a quiet reflection for all of us who've lost Paul, and it's a ceremony that invites us to sit with the mystery of death. And it reminds us that Paul was not just in his physical body, but that his presence and influence continues uninterrupted and cannot be undone by his death. I'm going to introduce Michael Cameron, who is going to lead us in this ceremony. Michael, do you want to come up here? Michael and Rocio are from Oakland, and they head up a lot of the activities at the Oakland East Lake Hall of Silo's Message. So go ahead and say a few more words.
So this is a very short ceremony. It's not a long, drawn-out thing. But I'd like to invite you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. I invite you to repeat after me. My mind is restless.
My mind is restless.
My heart is troubled.
My heart is troubled.
My body is tense.
My body is tense.
I relax my body, my heart, and my mind.
I relax my body, my heart, and my mind.
Life has ceased in Paul's body. Oh, this part you don't have to repeat. Life has ceased in Paul's body. We must now make an effort to separate in our minds the image of Paul's body from the image of the person we remember. The memory of Paul's body is not the person that we remember. Paul was much more than his body. Paul continues to be much more than his body. May those of you who do not feel the presence of another life separate from the body consider that although death has paralyzed Paul's body, the actions that he carried out continue, and their influence will never end. This chain of actions that was set in motion in life cannot be stopped by death. How profound it is to meditate on this truth, even if we do not completely comprehend the transformation of one action into another. And may those of you who do feel the presence of a separate life also consider that death has paralyzed only his body, that the mind has once again triumphantly freed itself, opening its way towards the light. Whatever our views, let us not weep for Paul's body. Rather, let us meditate on the root of our beliefs, and a gentle and silent joy will come to us. Peace in the heart, light in the understanding.
Thank you, Michael. Our second ceremony is one of gratitude.
Thank you.
Honoring Paul for all he gave to each of us and to the greater whole. And for this ceremony, Rocio is going to lead us. And Rocio is also from Oakland. Thank you, Rocio.
Hi. Well, this is also like to say thanks to Paul, and he was such a great man, and he did so many amazing things. That's just to remember. And he was so humble about the things that he did. So it's to take a moment to remember those good qualities. Hello, friends. We are here to bring Paul closer to us and place him in our hearts with a renewed meaning. So let's start to relax our bodies and quiet our minds. If you would like, you can close your eyes. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate his warm company. Look for a good memory of Paul. Remember something that Paul did that had an impact in your life. Identify his qualities and virtues that made that possible. Let's take a breath of air and imagine that we carry this air to our hearts. Be internally thankful. Give thanks for Paul, the wise man who moved mountains. Be internally thankful And why not carry the force of his best qualities in yourself? We accompany his flight by uplifting his virtues, elevating with our looks, once again, the light of his past actions, as we will witness them evolve in the external world. This shared affection, fiercely launched toward the deepest worlds, doesn't stop. It only expands, like our heart expands when it is included in others. Like our heart expands when its beats continue in others. As our roads cross paths with each other, let the best of Paul, his wise and gentle force, and the best of us draw existence together. Silo said once, I have seen in all the truly wise a child running playfully through the world of ideas and things, creating generous and brilliant bubbles only to burst them. In the sparkling eyes of all who are truly wise, I have seen the light feet of joy dancing toward the future. Peace, force, and joy. You also. Peace, force, joy.
For you also, peace, force, and joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocio. Thank you, Michael, and everyone. We're gonna pivot now to sharing, and I will start with a tribute to Paul, and probably be a little longer than some that I've asked the rest of you. I had a hard time putting it in 2 minutes. As you know, I've got to not look at that. I'm so used to giving lectures and pointing at screens. As you know, Paul passed away unexpectedly on March 9th. I don't want to focus on that, but I want to celebrate who he was. And he was so thoughtful, generous, and a deeply sincere person. He quietly dedicated his life to building something meaningful. I want to acknowledge his deep commitment to Silo's teachings and his publishing and translation work, his 50 years of service, all volunteer and grounded in inner work, the promotion of community and nonviolence and reconciliation. All of this gave him a sense of meaning and purpose and guided his life. Say a few words about his life. He was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1947. He moved to Pasadena in Southern California when he was in middle school. He then went on to study physics at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania and to do graduate work in fluid mechanics at Scripps Institute of Oceanography in San Diego. During this time, he started to feel that science alone wouldn't solve society's problems, which concerned him, and it prompted a lifelong search for deeper meaning. That search led him to the teachings of Silo, and in 1973, he traveled with a group of a dozen friends to Argentina to learn more. Silo was an Argentine philosopher. I was part of that group as well, and some others here. Over the next 50 years, Paul dedicated himself to this path. He translated so many of Silo's works and published them in English, and he nurtured community, connection, and respect for the human being. I met him in 1972, and we worked together on many projects as part of this movement. One of the most notable was a community project we called Meet Your Neighbors. And we were in Los Angeles. People didn't know who they lived next door to. And we were in an area with a lot of apartments. And we had instant block parties where we introduced people to each other. And it was in one of those gatherings that Paul met his future wife, Janet. And she lived just around the corner from him. Who would never have known, I think. They were married in 1985 and later had a son, Scott, who is with us today. And Scott now lives in Portland with his wife and two sons and the his parents-in-law and sisters-in-law. Paul was a devoted father and a proud grandfather. In 2011, Paul and Janet moved from San Diego to Red Bluff, and that's where they helped create this park, this Red Bluff Park of Study and Reflection. This park was sacred to Paul. It was a place that he visited several times a week to study, reflect, and meditate, guided by Silo's teachings and the work that we've done. Who he was as a person, I would just say he was humble, he was sincere, he was a good friend, he was generous with his time, and he never sought credit or recognition. He just quietly kept showing up, doing the work, and supporting his family and friends. And I would say, before his wife died, Janet died in 2020, Paul cared for her with unwavering devotion. He accompanied her through every stage of her struggle with cancer, including hospice and her final transition. He often reflected on this project as one of the most profound experiences of his life, being fully present and helping her. After she passed, we spoke and visited more often, sometimes for hours on the phone. We always loved to talk. He not only supported Janet, he supported so many of us. We have a community email lists, and we have a community and friends beyond that. And he often supported others through illness or loss. He created what we call askings, which is a kind of meditative prayer or a intention filled with sincerity and for the care and well-being of another person. And he'd write these beautiful askings and send them out on the list. And he not only did that, he told me he would sit down and meditate and really visualize what the best that he wanted for the other person. And he just took the time, even though I know he had his own struggles with his own health and his situation being a little isolated here in Red Bluff, but he took the time for other people. And I just so appreciated and admired that. My mother passed away last September, and at that time he offered me his presence, his guidance, and his deep comfort as she transitioned. And it was this guidance, which he sent me in a couple of emails, that I was able to use in turn as my husband and I supported him in his own transition to the light on March 9th. As you know, Paul passed unexpectedly a little over a month ago. And he was, what happened is he was taken to the emergency room, and he was accompanied by Yesenia. I don't know if she's here, but she will be. She's a dear friend here in Red Bluff, and she helped him get to the hospital. Lauren and I live in the Bay Area, and we immediately headed off on a 3-hour drive to get up here to just accompany him in the hospital until Scott could arrive. Scott's up in Portland. And we were very close to Red Bluff, about 20 minutes away, and we got the news that he'd passed. And nonetheless, we continued to the hospital, and we sat vigil with his body for several hours, reading him the Humanist Ceremony of Assistance and asking for his luminous passage. I was deeply touched. And I was grateful. I was grateful that we were able to be present to Paul at that time, that we were able to offer him reassuring words. I mean, he had already passed, but I know Paul believed that his body continued, that the consciousness could continue for a couple of hours. So we just decided to stay for those couple of hours, and we read him several times the ceremony of assistance and offered reassuring words and communicated with Scott to share final messages of love and kindness. It really meant a lot. And Yesenia joined us for part of this time too. So that was lovely. And I have to say that because we got the news from Scott while we were driving, Lauren, my husband, was able to send out a note to all of you, many of you on this call, that he had just passed. And we thought, wow, it's kind of sudden, because we had just sent a note in the morning to ask for his well-being because he was sick. But many of you have told us that you were asking right away as he passed, and knowing that we had a whole community asking at the same time was very uplifting for us to be. We were there in person, but we felt like it was all of us asking. And I get the sense of Paul in this luminous place, even though his body was there, and we were able to separate that body from Paul's spirit and his presence. And I just felt this alleviation and lightness in there. So in closing, I want to read a quote from a letter that Paul once wrote to the family of a friend of ours, that many of us, that passed away in 2014, Philip Freeman. And I don't know if Scott knows this, but I found this letter. Scott and I were going through Paul's office the other day, and in the middle of all the translations and copyrights, I found this one letter. And it was a copy of a letter he'd sent to the family of Philip Freeman. And there's just a quote that I think explains his views on life and death. And I want to read it to you. And this was Paul's own words. In some moments of inspiration, I have experienced a complete certainty that everything important in life goes on without interruption, that the apparent limits in life we sometimes believe in so strongly are in fact illusory, and that the greater truth is that there is no interruption. In this essential way, we will never be separated from our loved ones. If in silence we turn our gaze toward the future, we may see that everything important is invulnerable, continuing on past all apparent limits. And this fills me with a feeling of peace, that there is nothing to worry about as our loved one goes toward the spaces where all is well. In this way, we will always have our loved ones close. So we've made little cards, and we will share them by email with people on the call later. And this is a little keepsake for people, just to remember his dedication. I would now like to invite some others to share some comments. I'd like to start with Scott Tooby, Paul's son. And we'll share a few in the room and then go to the Zoom.
To read from my phone. I promise I'm not doom scrolling. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here to celebrate my father, Paul. It's hard to sum up a person like my dad in just a few minutes, because his impact was not loud or showy, but instead lived in the quiet, steady, loving way he moved through the world. He was kind, patient, calming, meticulous, the kind of presence that listened deeply to you and made you feel safe just by being near him. some of my earliest and fondest childhood memories are of him taking me sailing. He loved sailing and he grew up doing it. From all the time we spent on the water together, I could see he found a deep sense of peace and meaning in the ocean. Earlier in his adult life, the same fascination led him to his graduate studies in fluid mechanics, where he explored the physics of water with the same reverence he brought to sailing. For him, the ocean was a portal into the hidden patterns beneath the visible, and the universal truths he spent his life seeking. But over time, I think he found that science alone couldn't answer the bigger questions he was asking. That led him to his involvement with the humanist movement and later the Message, dedicating most of his life to translating the literary works of CeeLo and to bring about a world of peace through nonviolence, honoring the dignity of every human being. When I look back on his life with him, one of my dad's greatest gifts was his belief in me and his unwavering support for my musical education from childhood through college, after I fell in love with the piano and composing at an early age. When I was 12, he helped me build my first recording studio in my bedroom. And later, when I decided to study music composition in college, he never tried to steer me towards something else, like a safer engineering or science degree. Instead, he did what only Paul could do best. He dove into research, set up tours, interviews with professors and students, and eventually all the hard work led me to my top choice music composition school. And then with this education, I was able to pursue a career in music and technology, doing what I love, for which I'm forever grateful. My father spent his life trying to humanize the earth. And in doing so, he taught me what it means to be human, to be kind, patient, to live with purpose, and to cooperate with others to build a bright future for the world. So thank you, Dad, for everything. I'll miss you and love you forever. But I carry you with me in memory in your beautiful grandchildren, Leo and Kai, and in your guiding values we strive to live each day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.
I'd like to invite Norton, Paul's older brother, to say a few words now as well.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Scott. I've got a few thoughts here that I'll try and squeeze into 2 minutes.
I'll leave the microphone.
Thanks. I've got a few thoughts here on specific things about Paul's life that I think illustrate what we commonly feel about Paul. That he was an adventurous guy as a young person, age 19. Frank was 17, and our brother John, who passed away earlier, decided to take a open boat with powered by oars and a sail, a mast and sail down to Ensenada, New Mexico, and basically go south for 120 miles or so, sleeping and camping on the shore. And my only role in this was to trundle the boat, drive a boat down, and then go try to pick up the boat and drive it back afterwards. But it was definitely an adventure, and it was very successful. And I think it was empowering for my three brothers to experience that sort of opening of their horizons. Let's see. Paul was also, and Janet were very open to giving a lot of themselves to people close to them who were having a hard time. Janet's brother had problems and mental problems. I don't know a lot of details about it, except that I know that Paul and Janet accepted him into their home to live with them for 2 years. And that caring commitment was very much central to Paul. He also, of course, took a great commitment to caring for Janet during her medical problems, and it fits in with what Diana and Scott have said about his ability to open himself up to the humanity in others. And then, let's see, I had one other thought here. Oh yeah, Paul, as I understand it, Paul never took a course in Spanish. He taught himself how to read Spanish so that he could do the translation work of the publishing of Silo's stuff. And he was a smart cookie. He didn't always take the easier way. And he was very, very close to his family at all levels, as you've heard, and I don't need to repeat that. And so I just wanted to offer those three experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norton. I would like to ask Michael if he'd like to say a few things. Michael and Paul were particularly close, and Paul was so excited about the work that the people in the Oakland East Lake Hall of Silo's Message have been doing, the Salita in Oakland.
I want to say, like, Paul for me was definitely like a friend. You know, he was definitely like one of my closest friends. But since he passed away, he's converted into like an internal guide. You know, just as we're here, like the last few weeks, I've had to like call on him, you know, and just ask for his best, to feel his best qualities in myself. After Paul passed away a few weeks ago, I was able to talk to some of you here on the call, some of you here in the room. I was able to talk to his close friends about him and understand a little bit more. more about his life, about his internal process, and his deeper purpose. Little contributions that he wrote with care have cropped up on my computer screen the last few weeks. Like a short writing called "The Transition Has Been Made," which describes his moving personal experience, listening to one of Scott's creative musical projects and connecting it with The Day of the Winged Lion, a short fiction story about humanity's future transformation. And his notes on the day of work with the Force about how to create the conditions, about how anyone can create the conditions to have an important internal experience. And his revised Red Bluff Park booklet explaining the meanings behind the portal that you saw as you were driving in, the fountain, the monolith, and the other elements of our parks and the new living spirituality that's being born here. In these days since he passed away, I remembered him telling me about a project he dedicated himself fully to for 3 years and then failed. And when it did fail, he found himself with a small group of his friends, and the question came up, what can we do that would truly help our neighbors? In being there, in that moment of failure, asking that important question, planted the seed for one of his most inspired social projects. The Meet Your Neighbors campaign. Yeah. I have remembered Paul always telling me about his experiences with Carol from Red Bluff and her daughter, who was struggling with addiction, and the message community that they formed right here. I've remembered him telling me about his reflections on the qualities of light and how they are similar to the inner force that's present in all beings. This force, like light, is always in motion. So even though we perceive ourselves as static and unchanging, the truth is we're dynamic. He told me more about the physical properties of light than I could hope to understand. But I remember him relating it to chapter 9 of Silo's message, which says that this energy within us is in motion and can become independent of the body and maintain its unity. As our lives go by, suffering grows within us, or happiness and liberty. My years of friendship with Paul have helped me to quiet my internal noise and have brought me closer to that internal unity I've been looking for my whole life, and to find coherence with other people. Thank you, Paul.
I'd like to invite Lauren to say a few words.
.6'4". This happens all the time. I'd like to speak today to Paul's strength, because that's what he imparted to me over many years of knowing him. I first met Paul in early 2000s, and that was with Diana, and we stopped in San Diego to see Paul and Janet and Scott. I don't know how old Scott was then, if he remembers, but I remember the visit. And it was also at that time that I was just getting introduced to the vision and the ideas of CeeLo. Mostly through Diana, who fed it to me in small doses. And I was just, I remember being in a cafe in San Diego and struggling to understand some of the concepts, but I was sitting there by myself in a cafe trying to understand the concepts. And it's not the best way to understand CeeLo. I think the best way is in community. So when we stopped in San Diego, Paul became one of my first experiences, one of my first experiences, and helped me to begin to understand CeeLo's work in a deeper level. So he was one of my early impressions of CeeLo, and you know what they say about first impressions. So it's being the ones that seem to last longest. So over the years after that, especially after he moved here with Janet, I came to respect and admire the depth of his understanding. And he also, over those years, those 20-some years, became increasingly frail physically. And I could see that. He had some health challenges and other things that put him in that position. But what stayed steady and even grew for me in getting to know him was his inner strength. And I think that was due to all the work that he did here and all his interaction with members of the community that reinforced that strength in him. And he was able to impart that to others. He was a kind of minister of sorts. He was there for people in really difficult transitions at times. And even for me, speaking to him on the phone and in person, there were times when I was struggling and that strength came through and it helped me through it. So, his dedication and fidelity to CeeLo's teachings was just beautiful. And if there's an image that's been with me since his death. And we have these beautiful valley oaks in the park here. They're native California oak. And they've grown up with the park. They sprouted and began growing when we first had the land here, and they just grew over time. So they kind of grown up with people here, and they've just become these beautiful trees. And the thing about oaks, valley oaks, they're a keystone species. They support a whole community of life, of plants and animals and insects and mycorrhizal networks under the soil, the roots with the other oaks communicating to each other and so on. And I just find that to be such a powerful image of the communities in these parks as well. He reminds me of one of these valley oaks, and maybe I'll walk around and we'll see which oak we might dedicate to Paul's memory. There are others too in this park who I think are like these oaks. They impart strength. And so, I mean, he was even a little wiry and thin like the oaks, toward the end, but he had this gentleness and this steadiness and this quiet presence and kindness. And he did help support the whole community of life. The thing about oaks also is that when they fall, they begin their second life as sustainers. They decompose into the soil, or maybe they're harvested for someone's hearth at home, and they provide warmth of the fire. So I like to think of Paul as being in his second life now, and he is in a very real sense. He's a sustainer, and what he's left the world is sustaining all of us. I mean, through his legacy of Latitude Press, CeeLo's teaching collection, his son and his grandkids, and all of the conversations that he's had with us individually over the years, those live inside of us and are part of what he is sustaining. So He's feeding us as the oaks feed the soil as they decompose. And he's providing us with the warmth of his vision. So go well, brother. Thank you. And I love you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'd like to pivot to the Zoom and have a few people share on Zoom, and I'd like to ask Karen if she'd like to start. Will it automatically switch to Karen? Do you want to unmute yourself? Can we not?
Let's see. Well, I had written a letter to Paul, and it's a little long. So, in listening to Diana and so many people's experiences with their life with Paul, I really don't have anything much more to add. We were very good friends. And for years, every 2 months, we would get on the phone and talk for 2 hours. And really, he was just a very wonderful person. And when I heard that he had passed, I experienced like an internal emptiness that I've never felt with anyone else. But now it's come back. And so I think I can agree with Lauren that he's now into his second life. And all of us who have been friends with him, and, we have the doctrine of Silo, thanks to him and a team of other people, but he never gave up. He was always there. And in 2010, when we were in the park in Argentina, and it was the World March for Peace and Reconciliation. And so one day we were, there's a whole lot of people there. One day I was walking through one of the buildings, and Paul was talking with Silo, and Silo waved and asked me to come over. And he said, Karen, I want you to be my witness. You're my witness that I give total trust in the decisions that Paul will make about our publishing and our literary work. And that was, that's a very big role to play. So anyway, I'm very thrilled that he's been part of my life, and that we can see here how all of his quietness and his seriousness, because he always, for me, I knew that he never ever doubted what he had done with his life. And so that was like a person who was always there, and he was always looking for how to help other people. So that's what I can say. Thank you, Diana.
Back here a little bit. Okay. Danny, would you like to continue with a few words? You unmute yourself? Yeah. We're not hearing you. I think you're still muted.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Diana. I really don't want to. I feel like Karen that I had some remarks prepared in mind, and I'm just sort of overwhelmed by what everybody else has said, and I don't think I have anything very new to add to the wonderful comments that have gone so far. He was a good friend, a good person. He is indeed a sustainer in many ways.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. How about Mark? Mark Farrell would like to say a few words?
Sure. Thanks, Diana.
How comes no speaker view?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to get you on speaker view.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, like a number of you here, I'm part of the class of 1973. So it's an interesting time. But I'm also, as Danny said, I'm a little overwhelmed, and I certainly affirm all the things that have been said about Paul. I also wanted to shout out to Scott, who I wanted to thank for his the music he did to the guided experiences. Another one of the wonderful projects Paul did. I never had a chance to thank him for that. So it's a virtual thank you, but it's close as I can do. Anyway, just one thing, and that is Paul had a great sense of humor. And I mean, in his quiet, unassuming, humble way, I remember I could always sort of connect with him and his humor. And I think that was a very important part of what we were doing together uh, and with our friends to try and uh, change ourselves and change the world around us. I remember that one of the things we were looking at was this idea that people respond with different speeds to the world outside and their own internal world, depending on their interests, whether their energy goes more towards the world of ideas or the world of people or of things or the body. Anyway, Paul, I remember, I think, thought of himself as like the guy at the party who there's all this back and forth around a topic, and Paul is waiting to figure out and contribute something, and he's just about to say it, and the topic changes. And then party goes again, another topic, and he's waiting to say it, and the topic changed again. He's just always a little behind the curve. I must have identified with that. Anyway, so at one point, Paul and another guy, I think his name was Mike Trainer, who was there in the early time, he came up with a T-shirt which said, I'm trying to remember, something like Response Inhibited Incorporated. It was like sort of making a play about the people who find themselves always a little bit behind. Anyway, so that's an early memory I have of Paul and in his way and how he saw himself and things around him. But I just want to, again, I think that the Paul's campaign or the Meet Your Neighbors in many ways just captures for me Paul's sensibility and something about the way he is and did things and what was important to him and how he applied these ideas and at that moment. It just it was just something about that was so Paul. I know, Diana, you were very involved with that, and it wasn't a sexy project or a revolutionary one. Certainly, I don't think Che sat around strategizing about Meet Your Neighbors, but for Paul, this was, I mean, it was beautiful. It just sort of fit him. And it just, I always thought that. And we tried to translate it to New York because I never was in the same city as Paul over the last 50 years. And we talked about sort of doing Meet Your Neighbors in New York. So we asked one of our friends who was living in a building in the Lower East Side in a real rough, crazy neighborhood of the East Village about doing a Meet Your Neighbors in your building. And he's like, are you nuts? I don't want to meet my neighbors there. I got drug addicts. I've got Hell's Angels. I've got deadheads. No way am I going to meet my neighbors. Actually, I wish it would have happened. It probably would have been like a party scene from the Star Wars or something. But anyway, so, uh, that captured Paul. And I know Michael was bringing up, because I got to know Paul more in the last couple of years, thanks to Zoom and different meetings we were together with and conversations, that how moved he was by his connection with this woman who had cared for Janet and her daughter, and how that was so important to him, and really to me, captured that kind of intimacy and community that was key to Paul. So anyway, that's all I want to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mark. Is there someone else on Zoom that would like to share before we go back to the room?
I would, if that's okay.
Sure, please go
Hi.
ahead.
This is Lita. I'm Paul's sister-in-law.
Hi,
And
Nita.
hi. Diana, I think we met at Paul and Janet's wedding.
Yes,
It's nice
yes,
to see you. I think it's somehow appropriate that I'm zooming in from Santiago since Paul spent so much time here. And the first time John and I ever came here for a Darwin celebration, right after John talked, a gentleman came up to John and said, "Are you related to Paul Tooby?" And it was just, it was very wonderful. Paul had a way of seeing things whole, and he was so important to John at many times in his life, including when they almost died several times sailing. Um, Paul, he saw things whole in many ways. I remember sitting on a beach with Paul looking at the ocean, and Paul said, all of a sudden, he said, "Do you see how the foam is making hexagons?" And I looked, and by God, the foam was making hexagons on the ocean. I would never have seen that in a million years. And that's to me so emblematic of Paul. He was so important to John. After John's brothers left home and John was there alone, it was a very, very troubled time in his family. And John told me he had felt very fragmented internally. And at one point when Paul came home, they were standing out in the driveway, and Paul just started talking about everything going on in their lives and feeling about it and thinking about it. And John said it was like a revelation to him that you could actually think about these things and talk about these things. Paul and Janet stood by John and me through very, very difficult times in all of our lives in a way that it was both terrible, but also brought me closer to Paul and Janet and in wonderful ways. And Paul also, when John was dying, Paul called and spoke to him many times. I'd like to thank, I know a number of you were involved in askings for John, and thank you. John always perked up when he could talk to Paul on the phone. And in the day before he died, there was a former student of ours that had come to Santa Barbara and was helping Nike and me in the hospital with John. And that former student looks a little bit like the young Paul. And John was at this point in delirium. But he smiled. He looked at our student and he smiled and he said, "Paul." And it was clear that it was as if Paul was there with him. And so I just wanted to say on behalf of, John would probably be annoyed me speaking on behalf of him, but on behalf of John, how much he loved Paul and how important Paul was to all of John's growth. And I loved him very much too, and my dear sister-in-law Janet as well. Thank you all so much for putting this together.
Thank you. Thank you, Lita. I'm so glad you were able to join us. Is there anyone else on Zoom? I'll take one more and then we'll go back sharing some more in the room here. But I really appreciate the mosaic of comments and remarks that we've had.
I'd like to say briefly that at first when I heard about Paul's sudden passing, I thought of that Shakespeare quote about Robert Marlowe, that a great light has gone out, but now I feel that his light is still continuing, and I feel like we are all their torch bearers passing on the light. And another dear friend of mine died also suddenly, and I really feel what Michael said, that they become our guides, and I'm very thankful for them. Thank you all for doing this here.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
I'd like Raphael, did you want to say something? Rafa? Yes. Rafa, please.
Yeah, I got stimulated by Mark saying something about the 1973 gang or whatever it was. I was thinking, of all the things that I remember about Paul, and this is one that really, it seems crazy, but it was really important for me. And this was during a 1-month retreat that we shared in Texas. Some of you will remember, Diana for sure.
Yeah.
And I remember that we had this very long sessions of reading in the mornings. And sometimes someone would interrupt the reading to make some kind of comment, and then comments would go back and forth. And Paul, I watched Paul throughout this thing, and then he was very attentive and taking very, very precise notes during all the reading. And then when the conversation started, like getting a little crazy and stuff, he would doze off and he would go like this, And then suddenly someone would pick up the reading again and he would go like this and then start writing again. And to me, that's very, it's very much like Paul. To me, like some of us in this group, in this larger, bubble that we had, we would go crazy with ideas and with different things and stuff, but always knowing that in the back there was someone who would take care of everything else, that nothing would go wrong, in spite of all the craziness that we did. And that was Paul. Paul to me was like the guarantee that things would always turn out for the better, and I keep that with me. And I thank Paul for that, because it became part of my life then and today too.
Thank you. Thank you, Rafa. I'd like to turn back again to those of us here in Red Bluff and open it up. Is there someone who would like to say something? And if so, it would be lovely to Trudy come up here so the people on Zoom can hear you as well.
Yeah. About 15 years ago, as many of you know, we had a march for peace and nonviolence. And Paul a lot of us went to Argentina because it was going to culminate in the Andes at Punta de Vacas. And so Paul went, and my husband Jorge and I went. And at the time, Jorge was very ill. He was dying of lung cancer, but he wanted so much to be there, to see the end of the World March. And so there we were, and we got to the foot of the Andes, to Mendoza, Silo's hometown, and Jorge couldn't go any further. It became clear that he wasn't going to be around much longer. So he was in the hospital, and the World March was going to end the next day. And we couldn't, of course, be there. So I was with Jorge in the hospital at his bedside, and I found out that Paul was still in Mendoza. He hadn't gone up to the World March, to Punta de Vacas, because he showed up at the bedside, and he said, Janet called me from California because she hadn't gone, Janet called me and told me to come and to stay with you. And so he didn't go. He stayed with me by Jorge's bedside, and he was there when Jorge passed. And it was just, so important to me that he was there, and then he took care of me afterwards and took me up to Punta de Vacas. And so he and I were there that day and actually did see the end of the march. So that's all I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Trudy. That was moving. Someone else like to say a couple of words in the room? Anyone else on Zoom? I think we're nearing the end. We have a couple more minutes, but if I feel like we've got a pretty complete picture of Paul through all of our comments. And we invite all of you to stay after we end the formal part of this ceremony, this celebration for Paul, remembering him. We're going to have food and visiting out here in the park. It's a beautiful day, and we've set up tables, and the food is coming. And for those of you on Zoom, we'll keep the Zoom link open for informal conversation and sharing as well, but we won't be monitoring it like we have now. But I just want to thank everyone for coming and showing up to honor and celebrate Paul today. And, I think, as Paul might have said, to celebrate the launching of his life and spirit toward immortal transcendence.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll end the formal part, but we'll stay connected on Zoom and